Jake Martinez walked slowly through the long hallways of the Galactic Academy. His black uniform felt stiff against his skin. The academy was built inside a huge space station called Kepler Station. It floated in the dark space between 3 different star systems. Jake was one of only 12 humans who got accepted to study here. That made him special, but also made him feel very alone. The hallways were wide and tall. They had to be big enough for all the different alien species that studied here. Some aliens were as small as cats. Others were as big as elephants. The walls glowed with a soft blue light that came from some kind of alien technology Jake did not understand yet. As Jake walked, other students moved away from him. They pressed themselves against the walls when he got close. Their many different eyes watched him with fear. Some aliens had 6 eyes. Others had eyes that glowed in the dark. A few had no eyes at all but seemed to sense him anyway. Jake tried to smile at them, but that only made them more scared. He had learned in his first week that showing teeth was seen as a threat by most alien species. Humans were the only ones who smiled to be friendly. Everyone else thought it meant he wanted to fight or eat them. He passed a group of small blue aliens who looked like walking flowers. They whispered to each other in their musical language when they saw him. Jake caught a few words he had learned. They were saying Deathworlder and Predator and Dangerous. These words followed him everywhere he went. Jake reached his classroom and sat down in the back row. The chairs were made to fit many different body types, so they were not very comfortable for humans. He pulled out his datapad and looked at his notes from yesterday. Today was a xenobiology class with Professor Vextar. The classroom filled up with students. Most of them sat as far away from Jake as possible. There were Zephyrians who looked like tall, thin birds with colorful feathers. There were Harmony Collective members who looked like giant praying mantis insects, but with gentler faces. The silicate beings looked like walking crystals that made soft chiming sounds when they moved. Lisa Chen walked into the room and Jake felt relieved. She was the only other human in his section of classes. Lisa had short black hair and smart brown eyes. She always seemed to understand things faster than everyone else. The alien students were just as afraid of her as they were of Jake, but she did not seem to mind as much. Lisa sat down next to Jake. "Good morning," she said quietly. "Ready for another day of being the scary monsters?" Jake laughed softly. "I still don't understand it. Back on Earth, I worked at an animal shelter. I spent my time helping sick puppies and cats." "I know," Lisa said. "I was a kindergarten teacher. I spent my days reading stories to 5-year-old kids and tying their shoes. But here, everyone thinks we are going to eat them." Professor Vextar entered the classroom. The professor was a silicate being who stood about 8 feet tall. His body looked like it was made of clear crystal with light moving through it in patterns. When he talked, his voice sounded like wind chimes in a gentle breeze. "Good morning, students," Professor Vextar said. His voice filled the room without being loud. "Today we will study apex predators and their role in maintaining balance in ecosystems." The alien students seemed excited about this topic. They leaned forward in their seats and pulled out their datapads. Jake noticed that most of them came from what humans would call garden worlds. These were planets where everything was peaceful and gentle. They had never seen real predators except in videos and books. An apex predator, the professor continued, is a species that sits at the top of the food chain. They hunt other animals, but are rarely hunted themselves. They are usually larger, stronger, and more dangerous than the animals they hunt. Jake and Lisa exchanged a look. On Earth, humans were definitely apex predators, even though most people did not think about it that way. Humans had hunted everything from rabbits to whales. They had spread across every continent and every environment on their planet. Today, Professor Vextar announced, we will not just talk about apex predators. We will observe one. I have arranged for a live demonstration. The alien students made excited chirping and humming sounds. Jake saw Zeptic, one of the mantis-like Harmony Collective students, rubbing his front legs together with anticipation. The Zephyrian students fluffed their colorful feathers and whispered to each other. Professor Vextar moved to the center of the classroom. He pressed something on a device in his crystal hand. The air in the middle of the room began to shimmer. A containment field was forming. It looked like a giant soap bubble, but Jake knew it was made of energy that could hold almost anything. Inside, the creature you are about to see, the professor said, comes from a world called Nixaria. It is what we call a rim world, located on the very edge of known space. The conditions there are harsh and dangerous. Only the strongest and most adaptable creatures survive. The shimmer in the containment field grew brighter. Jake could see something starting to appear inside it. At first it was just a shadow, but then it became more solid. Students, Professor Vextar said with obvious pride in his voice, meet the Korthak Shadow Hunter. The creature that appeared made several students gasp out loud. Some of the smaller aliens actually squeaked in fear and moved their chairs back from the containment field. The Shadow Hunter was huge. It stood at least 8 feet tall, maybe more. Its body was covered in dark fur that seemed to absorb light. Along its sides and back, bioluminescent stripes glowed with a soft purple light. The stripes pulsed in a slow, steady rhythm like a heartbeat. Its head was long and narrow with a mouth full of sharp teeth. Its eyes were large and completely black. They seemed to look right through everything they saw. The creature's arms were long and muscular, ending in hands with claws that looked like they could cut through metal. But what made it truly frightening was how it moved. It did not stomp around like a big dumb animal. It moved with grace and intelligence. Every step was calculated, every turn of its head was purposeful. This was clearly a thinking creature, and that made it much more dangerous than any simple beast. The Shadow Hunter tested the containment field, pressing against it with one clawed hand. The energy barrier held, but Jake could see the creature, was studying it, looking for weaknesses. The Korthak Shadow Hunter, Professor Vextar explained, is considered one of the most efficient predators in known space. It has never been successfully contained by any species before today. Its hunting success rate is 97%. Several more students made frightened sounds. One of the flower-like Zephyrians started crying, making a sound like rain falling on leaves. This creature can phase through certain materials, the professor continued. It is highly intelligent, with problem-solving abilities that rival most sapient species. It hunts alone and has never been observed showing mercy to its prey. Jake found himself leaning forward instead of back like the other students. There was something about the way the Shadow Hunter moved that seemed familiar to him. It reminded him of something, but he could not figure out what. Lisa was also watching the creature carefully. She was taking notes on her datapad while most of the other students were too scared to do anything but stare. The Shadow Hunter finished testing the containment field and turned to look at the students. Its black eyes moved from one alien to another. When it looked at them, the creature's stripes changed from purple to bright red. Its lips pulled back to show more of its sharp teeth. But when its gaze reached Jake and Lisa, something strange happened. The red stripes faded back to purple. The creature tilted its head to one side, like a dog hearing an interesting sound. It took a step closer to their side of the containment field. Jake felt his heart beating faster, but not from fear. He felt excited, curious. This was the most interesting thing that had happened since he arrived at the academy. The alien students pressed themselves against the back walls of the classroom. Their fear was so strong that Jake could almost smell it in the air. The Shadow Hunter's black eyes continued to scan the room, moving from one terrified face to another. Zeptic, the mantis-like student from the Harmony Collective, began shaking so hard that his chair started rattling. His large compound eyes were fixed on the Shadow Hunter, and his breathing became fast and shallow. Suddenly his eyes rolled back and he fell over sideways. He had fainted from pure terror. 2 medical drones flew into the room immediately. They were small flying robots that the Academy used for emergencies. The drones lifted Zeptic carefully and carried him out of the classroom. His unconscious body hung limp between them as they flew away. As you can clearly observe, Professor Vextar continued as if nothing had happened. The psychological impact of the Shadow Hunter is perhaps its greatest weapon. The mere sight of this creature causes immediate fear responses in most sapient species. A small blue Zephyrian student raised one of her feathered arms. Professor, why does it affect us so strongly? We have never seen this creature before. Professor. Vextar's crystal body flickered with what looked like approval. An excellent question, Kirillin. The answer lies in something called genetic memory. Your ancestors evolved on worlds where creatures like this meant certain death. That fear is built into your very DNA. Jake listened to this explanation while watching the Shadow Hunter. Unlike his classmates, he did not feel afraid. Instead, he felt curious. The creature's movements reminded him of something he had seen before, but he still could not place what it was. The Shadow Hunter had stopped scanning the other students. Now it was focused entirely on the section where Jake and Lisa sat. Its head tilted further to one side, and the bioluminescent stripes along its body began to pulse in a different pattern. Instead of the steady heartbeat rhythm from before, the lights now flickered in quick, complex sequences. The Shadow Hunter's bioluminescence serves multiple purposes, Professor Vextar explained. It can be used for camouflage, for communication with others of its species, and most importantly, for psychological warfare against prey. But as Jake watched, the creature's light patterns did not look like psychological warfare. They looked like something else entirely. The lights were too organized, too purposeful. They reminded him of Morse code, or maybe sign language. Lisa was thinking the same thing. She leaned over to Jake and whispered, "Those light patterns, do they look random to you?" Jake shook his head. "No, they look like it's trying to say something." Several other students heard them talking and turned to stare. A tall silicate student named Crystal made a sound like breaking glass. "The humans are not afraid," she said in wonder. "How is this possible?" "Fear is not always the correct response," Lisa said calmly. She was still taking notes on her datapad, recording the Shadow Hunter's light patterns. "Sometimes understanding is better than fear." The Shadow Hunter seemed to hear her voice. Its black eyes focused directly on Lisa, and the light patterns changed again. This time they were slower, more deliberate. The creature took a step closer to the containment field, pressing its face almost against the energy barrier. Professor Vextar noticed the creature's behavior and stopped his lecture. "This is highly unusual," he said. His crystal body was flickering rapidly, which Jake had learned meant the professor was confused or excited. Shadow hunters typically become more aggressive when they detect prey that is not showing proper fear responses. "Maybe it doesn't see us as prey," Jake suggested. The classroom went completely silent. Even the soft humming sounds that some aliens made when they breathed seemed to stop. The idea that a shadow hunter might not see them as prey was apparently shocking to everyone. "Impossible," Professor Vextar said firmly. "Shadow hunters are apex predators. Every living thing is either prey or competition to them. There are no other categories in their simple predator minds." Jake stood up from his chair. The movement caused several alien students to gasp and move even further away. They probably thought he was going to do something dangerous. But Jake just wanted to get a better look at the shadow hunter. The creature watched Jake rise, and its light patterns became even more complex. The purple glow spread across more of its body, creating intricate designs that shifted and changed like living art. Its black eyes never left Jake's face. "Jake, what are you doing?" Lisa whispered, but she did not sound afraid. She sounded curious. "I'm not sure yet," Jake replied. He took a step closer to the containment field. The shadow hunter mirrored his movement, taking a step closer from its side. Now only the energy barrier separated them. Jake could see his own reflection in the creature's black eyes. He could see every detail of its face, from the sharp teeth to the small scars that marked its dark fur. "Student Martinez, please return to your seat immediately," Professor Vextar commanded. His voice had lost its gentle wind chime quality, and now sounded sharp and worried. But Jake did not move back. Instead, he crouched down so that his eyes were level with the shadow hunter's eyes. The creature immediately crouched down as well, copying his position exactly. The classroom was so quiet that Jake could hear his own heartbeat. He could also hear something else. The shadow hunter was making a sound, very soft and low. It was not growling or snarling like an angry predator would. It was more like purring or maybe humming. "It's trying to communicate," Jake said softly. That is scientifically impossible, Professor Vextar insisted. Shadow hunters are non-communicative predators. They do not have language or social behaviors. Lisa stood up and joined Jake near the containment field. The shadow hunter's attention shifted to include both humans now. Its light patterns became even brighter and more complex, covering its entire body in flowing designs. Professor, Lisa said respectfully, with all due respect, I think you might be wrong about that. The crystal professor's body flickered so rapidly it looked like a strobe light. Miss Chen, I have studied apex predators for over 40 years. I assure you that shadow hunters do not communicate. Then what do you call this? Lisa asked, pointing at the creature's light show. The shadow hunter seemed to understand that they were talking about its lights. It made the patterns even more obvious, slowing them down and repeating certain sequences. It was clearly trying to make sure they could see and understand what it was doing. Jake had a sudden realization. Lisa, remember when we studied animal behavior back on Earth? What does this remind you of? Lisa watched the creature for a moment, then her eyes widened. Oh my God. It's like watching a dog trying to play, or a dolphin trying to get attention. The comparison made perfect sense to Jake. The shadow hunter's behavior was not aggressive at all. It was social. It was trying to interact with them the same way a friendly animal might try to interact with humans. That's impossible, a Zephyrian student called out from the back of the room. Dogs and dolphins are not apex predators. Actually, Jake said, turning to face the class, they are. Dolphins are one of the top predators in Earth's oceans, and dogs evolved from wolves, which are definitely apex predators. But they're also social animals. They live in groups and communicate with each other. The shadow hunter made a new sound, louder than the humming from before. It sounded almost like approval, as if it was agreeing with what Jake had said. Professor Vextar was quiet for a long moment. His crystal body had stopped flickering and was now glowing steadily. If what you are suggesting is true, he said slowly, then everything we know about shadow hunters is wrong. Not wrong, Lisa corrected gently. Just incomplete. You've been studying them as if they were mindless killing machines. But what if they're actually intelligent social creatures who have been misunderstood? The shadow hunter pressed both of its hands against the containment field, spreading its fingers wide. Its light patterns pulsed in what looked like excitement or joy. For the first time since the demonstration began, it looked less like a terrifying monster and more like a lonely person who had finally found someone who understood. Jake slowly reached out his hand toward the containment field. The shadow hunter watched his movement carefully, its black eyes tracking every inch of his approach. When Jake's palm was almost touching the energy barrier, the creature did something that made everyone in the room hold their breath. It reached out its own hand and placed it against the containment field, directly opposite Jake's palm. Even through the energy barrier, Jake could feel the warmth radiating from the creature's skin. The shadow hunter's bioluminescent stripes pulsed brighter, creating patterns that looked almost like a heartbeat made of light. This is unprecedented, Professor Vexatar whispered. His crystal body was barely glowing now, which meant he was in deep shock. In all recorded history, no shadow hunter has ever shown peaceful contact behavior. Lisa stepped closer to the containment field. The shadow hunter turned its head to look at her, keeping one hand pressed against the barrier near Jake's. Its light patterns shifted to include new colors that none of them had seen before, soft blues and greens mixed with the purple, creating designs that looked like flowers blooming across its dark fur. It's beautiful, Lisa said softly. Look at those patterns. They're not random at all. Each design is different, but they all connect to each other. The shadow hunter seemed to understand that she was talking about its lights. It began creating new patterns, more complex than before. The lights started at its hands and flowed up its arms, across its chest, and down its back. It was like watching a living light show, but one with purpose and meaning. Jake noticed that some of the patterns were repeating. Lisa, are you recording this? Already on it, she replied, holding up her datapad. The device was capturing every detail of the creature's light display. I'm running it through the translation programs we learned about in linguistic class. From the back of the classroom, a brave Zephyrian student called out, "What if it's dangerous? What if this is some kind of trick to make you lower your guard?" The shadow hunter heard the fearful voice and turned to look at the alien students. Immediately, its light patterns changed. The gentle blues and greens disappeared, replaced by sharp reds and oranges. Its posture became more aggressive, and it bared its teeth in what looked like a warning. But when it turned back to Jake and Lisa, the aggressive colors faded away instantly. The peaceful blues and greens returned and its posture relaxed. The message was clear. It saw the humans differently than it saw the other students. "Did everyone see that?" Jake asked the class. "It's responding to fear with aggression, but responding to calm with peace. That's not mindless predator behavior. That's intelligence." Professor Vextar moved closer to the containment field, though he stayed well behind the two humans. "If you are correct, this changes everything we know about Shadowhunter psychology. But I must ask, why are you two not afraid? Your species evolved on a death world just as dangerous as Nyxaria." Lisa looked at Jake, and they both smiled. It was the kind of smile that comes from understanding something that others don't. "Professor," Lisa said, "I think that's exactly why we're not afraid. We recognize what we're looking at." "Explain," the professor requested. Jake kept his hand pressed against the containment field. The shadow hunter had not moved its hand away, either. "On Earth, we have animals called wolves. They're apex predators, very dangerous if you don't understand them. For thousands of years, humans feared wolves. We told stories about them as monsters that would eat us. But then we learned something important," Lisa continued. "Wolves aren't monsters. They're social animals with complex family structures. They communicate with each other, they play, they take care of their young, and they mourn their dead." The shadow hunter made a soft sound, almost like it was agreeing with what they were saying. It began creating new light patterns, these ones slower and more deliberate. Jake thought they looked like the creature was trying to tell them a story. "More importantly," Jake added, "once humans understood wolves, we became partners with them. We domesticated some of them and they became dogs. The partnership between humans and wolves became one of the most successful relationships in Earth's history." A small gasp came from somewhere in the room. One of the alien students had understood what Jake was suggesting. "You think shadow hunters could be partners instead of predators?" asked Kirillin, the blue Zephyrian who had asked questions earlier. "I think they might already want to be," Lisa replied. She pointed at her datapad. "Look at these translation results. The patterns aren't random, they're structured like language." The shadow hunter seemed to understand that they were trying to decode its communication. It began making the same patterns over and over, slowly and clearly. It was like watching a teacher repeat a lesson to make sure students understood. Jake felt a sudden rush of excitement. "It's trying to teach us its language. Professor Vexitar's." Crystal body began flickering again. "This is impossible. If shadow hunters have language, if they're intelligent social beings, then why has no one ever discovered this before?" "Because no one ever tried to communicate with them," Lisa said simply. "Everyone was too afraid. They saw a dangerous predator and immediately went into defensive mode." "But we're predators too," Jake added. "We come from a death world just like they do. We understand what it's like to be feared and misunderstood." The shadow hunter's light pattern suddenly became very bright and very complex. The lights raced across its body in spirals and waves, creating designs that were almost too beautiful to look at directly. The creature made a sound that was definitely not aggressive. It sounded like joy, or maybe relief. "I think it understands what we're saying," Lisa whispered. The creature began pointing at things with one of its clawed hands. First it pointed at itself, then at Jake and Lisa, then at the other students. Each time it pointed, different light. Patterns appeared on its body. It was showing them that it saw a difference between the humans and the aliens. Jake had an idea. He pointed at himself and said clearly, "Human." Then he pointed at Lisa and said, "Human." Finally, he pointed at the shadow hunter and waited. The creature's eyes widened and its light patterns pulsed rapidly. It pointed at itself and made a sound that was definitely a word in its own language. The sound was deep and musical, with clicks and growls mixed in. "Did it just tell us its species name?" Lisa asked, her voice full of wonder. The shadow hunter repeated the sound, pointing at itself again. Then it made a different sound and pointed specifically at its own face. Jake realized that this second sound was probably its personal name. "It has a name," Jake said, looking around the classroom. "This isn't just an intelligent species. This is an individual person with their own identity." The alien students were starting to creep closer to the containment field. Their fear was being replaced by curiosity. They had never seen anything like this before. Professor Vextar was taking notes rapidly on his own datapad. If this is true, if shadow hunters are people rather than mere predators, then the galaxy has made a terrible mistake. We've been treating an intelligent species like dangerous animals. The shadow hunter seemed to sense the change in the room's atmosphere. Its light patterns became gentler, more welcoming. It began making the same greeting gesture to other students that it had made to Jake and Lisa. But most of the aliens were still too afraid to respond. Only Jake and Lisa understood that they were witnessing first contact with a species that had been alone and misunderstood for far too long. The creature looked back at the two humans, and Jake could swear he saw hope in those black eyes. Hope that finally someone understood who they really were. The classroom door burst open with a loud bang. Dr. Kelshawn rushed in, followed by 3 security drones and 2 more professors. Dr. Kelshawn was the head of the xenobiology department. He was a tall, thin alien with gray skin and 4 arms. His species came from a world where gravity was much stronger than most places, so he was very strong despite looking fragile. "What is the meaning of this?" Dr. Kelshawn demanded, his voice echoing through the room. "I received emergency reports that students were in danger from an uncontrolled predator." Professor Vextar's crystal body flickered nervously. "Doctor, the situation is under control but highly unusual. The shadow hunter is displaying behaviors that contradict everything in our scientific literature." Dr. Kelshawn looked around the room. He saw the alien students pressed against the wall, still afraid but no longer panicking. He saw Jake and Lisa standing calmly next to the containment field. Most importantly, he saw the shadow hunter itself, which was not acting like a caged predator at all. The creature had noticed the new arrivals. Its light patterns shifted to the aggressive reds and oranges it had shown before when faced with fear. But it did not attack the containment field or try to break free. Instead, it moved protectively in front of where Jake and Lisa stood, as if it was trying to shield them from potential danger. "Fascinating," Dr. Kelshawn said quietly. His forearms moved independently as he pulled out different scanning devices. "The creature is showing protective behavior toward the human students. This should be impossible." Jake turned to face the department head. "Dr. Kelshawn, with respect, I think the problem is that everyone has been studying shadow hunters wrong. Explain yourself, young human." Lisa stepped forward, holding her datapad. "Doctor, we've been recording the creature's bioluminescent patterns. They're not random displays or simple emotional responses, they're structured communication. The shadow hunter has been trying to talk to us." Dr. Kelshawn's 4 eyes widened. Each eye was a different color, and they all focused on Lisa's datapad. "Show me this data immediately." Lisa handed over her device. Dr. Kelshawn studied the recordings, his 4 arms moving quickly as he ran the patterns through different analysis programs. The other professors gathered around him, looking over his shoulders. "By the ancient stars," whispered Professor Yinthara, a floating, jellyfish-like being who taught advanced linguistics. "These patterns show grammatical structure. Subject-verb-object relationships. This is definitely language." The shadow hunter watched the professors examining the data. It began creating new light patterns, these ones more complex than any they had seen before. The lights formed shapes that looked almost like pictures. Jake could make out what looked like landscapes, other creatures, and even what might have been buildings or cities. "It's showing us images," Jake realized. "It's trying to tell us about its home." Dr. Kelshawn looked up from the datapad. "Human students, I need you to help me understand what is happening here. In 30 years of studying Deathworld predators, I have never encountered anything like this. Jake looked at the shadow hunter, which was still creating its light pictures. Doctor, I think the problem is in how you approach them. You study them as specimens, as examples of dangerous predators. But what if they're not just predators? What if they're people? People. Dr. Kelshawn repeated the word as if he had never heard it before. Intelligent beings with their own culture, their own society, their own way of looking at the world. Lisa explained. On Earth, we used to think that many animals were just mindless beasts. But the more we studied them, the more we realized how complex and intelligent they really were. The shadow hunter seemed to understand that they were talking about it. It moved closer to the containment field and began a new series of light patterns. These were different from the others. They seemed sadder, more mournful. Professor Yinthara floated closer to the containment field. If I am reading these patterns correctly, it appears to be expressing grief or loss. Jake felt his heart sink as he watched the creature's display. It's alone, isn't it? That's what it's trying to tell us. It's the only one of its kind here. The shadow hunter's patterns confirmed his guess. The lights showed single figures separated from groups, long journeys through empty space, and the same mournful patterns repeated over and over. If shadow hunters are intelligent social beings, Dr. Kelshawn said slowly, then keeping them isolated would be a form of torture. We may have been committing crimes against sapient beings without knowing it. Lisa was working with her datapad again, trying to decode more of the creature's communication. Jake, look at this. I think it's asking us questions now. The shadow hunter was creating patterns that clearly had the structure of questions. The lights would form shapes, pause, then repeat with slight variations. It was asking about Jake and Lisa, about their species, about their world. Jake tried to answer using simple gestures and words. He pointed to himself and said, "Human" again. Then he pointed upward and said, "Earth." The shadow hunter's patterns became brighter, more excited. It was learning. This is remarkable, Professor Vextar said. We are witnessing first contact protocols between two species, and it is happening naturally through mutual understanding rather than formal diplomatic channels. Dr. Kelshawn was taking detailed notes with all four of his arms. Human students, your species has accomplished something that no other galactic civilization has managed. You have established peaceful communication with shadow hunters. The shadow hunter began creating the most complex patterns they had seen yet. The lights covered its entire body, forming intricate designs that shifted and flowed like living art. But these patterns were different. They seemed to be asking something important. I think it's asking about other humans, Lisa said, studying her translation programs. It wants to know if there are more of us. Jake nodded to the creature. Yes, many humans. On Earth, in space, on other worlds. The shadow hunter's response was immediate and intense. Its patterns became so bright they almost hurt to look at. The creature began moving in what could only be described as a dance, its lights creating celebration patterns. Across its body, it's not just happy, Jake realized. It's hopeful. Dr. Kelshawn set down his datapad and looked directly at Jake and Lisa. Human students, what you have accomplished here today will change everything. If shadow hunters are intelligent beings who have been misunderstood and isolated, then we have a responsibility to make contact with others of their species. But there's a problem, Professor Vexitar pointed out. Shadow hunters are considered extremely dangerous by every known civilization. No one will believe that they are anything other than deadly predators. Jake looked at the magnificent creature before him. It had stopped its celebration dance and was listening to their conversation. He could see intelligence in its black eyes and something else. Trust. The shadow hunter was trusting them to help it. Then we'll have to prove it, Jake said simply. We'll have to show the galaxy that they've been wrong about shadow hunters. The creature moved closer to the containment field again. It placed both hands against the energy barrier and looked directly into Jake's eyes. Its light patterns were gentle now, grateful. Jake realized that this creature had probably been alone for a very long time, maybe its entire life. We'll help. You, Jake promised, placing his own hands against the barrier opposite the creature's. We'll find others like you. You won't be alone anymore. The shadow hunter's patterns pulsed once, bright and beautiful, and Jake knew that somehow it understood. Dr. Kelshawn made a decision that would change galactic history forever. He walked slowly toward the containment field control panel, his four hands moving over the controls with careful precision. "Doctor, what are you doing?" Professor Vextar asked, his crystal body flickering with alarm. "I am going to deactivate the containment field," Dr. Kelshawn announced. "If this creature is truly intelligent and peaceful, then keeping it caged is wrong." The alien students pressed themselves even further against the walls. Some of them made frightened sounds in their native languages. Kira Lin, the Blue Zephyrian, spoke up with a shaking voice. "Doctor, what if you are wrong? What if it attacks us?" Dr. Kelshawn paused, his hand still on the controls. "Then we will deal with that situation. But if we are right, if shadow hunters are intelligent beings who have been misunderstood, then this moment will mark the beginning of a new age of understanding in the galaxy." Jake felt his heart pounding, but not from fear. He felt excited and nervous at the same time. "Doctor, if you are going to do this, Lisa and I should be the ones to make first contact. The creature trusts us." "Agreed," Dr. Kelshawn said. "But I want security drones standing by just in case." The shadow hunter seemed to understand what was happening. Its light patterns became very calm and gentle. It moved to the center of the containment field and sat down on the floor, making itself as non-threatening as possible. Its black eyes stayed focused on Jake and Lisa, and its expression seemed almost hopeful. "It knows what we are planning," Lisa observed. "Look how it is positioning itself. It is trying to show us that it is not dangerous." Dr. Kelshawn nodded and pressed the final control. The containment field shimmered and disappeared. For the first time in who knows how long, the shadow hunter was free. The creature did not move at first. It sat perfectly still, as if it could not believe that the barrier was really gone. Then, very slowly, it stood up and took a single step forward. Jake stepped forward as well, meeting the creature halfway. They were now standing face to face with no barrier between them. Jake could smell the shadow hunter's scent, which was surprisingly pleasant, like pine trees and rain. "Hello," Jake said softly, extending his hand in the same gesture he had made against the containment field. The shadow hunter looked at Jake's outstretched hand, then carefully reached out with its own clawed hand. Their palms touched, skin to skin, for the first time. The creature's hand was warm and surprisingly gentle despite the sharp claws. The moment their hands touched, the shadow hunter's entire body lit up with the most beautiful light display anyone in the room had ever seen. Colors flowed across its fur in waves of joy and gratitude. The patterns were so complex and beautiful that several of the alien students gasped in wonder. Lisa joined them, and the shadow hunter extended its other hand to her as well. Now all three of them stood together in the center of the classroom, connected by touch and understanding. "This is first contact," Dr. Kelshawn said quietly, recording everything with his devices. "We are witnessing the first peaceful meeting between shadow hunters and galactic civilization." The shadow hunter began creating new light patterns, more urgent than before. These patterns were different from the simple communication they had seen earlier. They were complex stories told in light and color. Professor Yanthara floated closer, her translation devices working frantically. "It is telling us about its people. There are others scattered across the galaxy. They have been hiding, living alone, afraid to make contact because everyone treats them as monsters." The creature's patterns showed images of other shadow hunters living in caves and abandoned places, always hiding from the civilized worlds. It showed the loneliness, the fear, the sadness of a people who had no home and no friends. "They are refugees," Lisa realized, tears starting to form in her eyes. Their homeworld was destroyed and they have been wandering the galaxy ever since, but no one will accept them, because everyone is afraid. Jake felt anger building in his chest, but not at the shadow hunter. He was angry at the galaxy at all, the civilized worlds that had turned away these people just because they looked frightening. "How long?" Jake asked the creature. "How long have your people been alone?" The shadow hunter's patterns showed time passing. Years and decades and generations. It had been centuries since shadow hunters had lived together as a people. Centuries of loneliness and isolation. "This is a tragedy beyond imagination," Dr. Kelshawn said, his forearms working frantically to record everything. "An entire intelligent species has been forced into exile because of fear and misunderstanding." The creature began making new patterns, these ones directed specifically at Jake and Lisa. The lights formed shapes that looked like questions, and the meaning was clear even without translation. "It is asking if humans would be willing to help," Professor Yinthara translated. "It wants to know if we would be willing to meet with other shadow hunters to help them find a place where they can live together again." Jake looked into the creature's black eyes and saw hope there, fragile and precious. This being had been alone for so long, and now it dared to hope that maybe, finally, its people could come home. "Yes," Jake said firmly. "Humans will help. We understand what it is like to be misunderstood. We understand what it is like to be feared just because of where you come from." The shadow hunter's light patterns exploded into pure joy. The creature moved closer and very gently wrapped its arms around both humans in what could only be called a hug. Its warmth surrounded them, and they could feel its grateful purrs vibrating through its chest. The alien students in the classroom were crying now, but not from fear. They were crying from the beauty of what they were witnessing. Even Zeptik, who had fainted earlier, had returned and was watching with wonder. "I have been wrong," Professor Vextar admitted, his crystal body glowing with shame. "We have all been wrong. We studied these beings as animals when we should have been trying to understand them as people." Dr. Kelshawn was already making plans. "We will need to contact the Galactic Council immediately. This changes everything about how we understand apex predator species, and we will need human ambassadors to help us make contact with other shadow hunters." "We volunteer," Lisa said. "Immediately. Jake and I will help in any way we can." The shadow hunter stepped back from the hug but kept one hand on each of their shoulders. It began creating new patterns, and these were the most complex yet. The lights formed maps and star charts, showing locations throughout the galaxy where other shadow hunters might be found. "It is giving us a roadmap," Jake realized. "It is showing us where to find its people." The creature nodded, understanding Jake's words even though they came from different species. It pointed to itself, then to Jake and Lisa, then to the star maps it had created. The message was clear. We will go together. "The first joint human shadow hunter expedition," Dr. Kelshawn said with wonder. "Students, you have just volunteered for the most important mission in galactic history." Jake looked at his new friend, this magnificent being who had been alone for so long. "We won't let you down," he promised. "Your people will have a home again." The shadow hunter's patterns pulsed once, bright and beautiful and full of hope. For the first time in centuries, shadow hunters would not be alone. And it was humanity, the newest Deathworld species in the galaxy, who had shown them that being a predator did not mean being a monster. The age of understanding had begun,